This is Dwarf Fortress. It's a roguelike colony sim. It's one of those games that influenced countless others in the genre, but many haven't even heard of it. It inspired the likes of Rumbled, Terraria, Project Zomboid, and even Minecraft, so it's a pretty culturally significant game. I thought it was the first colony sim game ever made, and if you saw the original graphics, you'd see why I thought that. It has been in development since 2002 though, and recently a playable version was released on Steam. And that's what I'm going to be reviewing, because I'm not the type of person who can look at this and not go insane. Before we get into it, please consider subscribing. I'm a small channel, so each sub is literally a percentile of my subscriber base. The first thing I have to mention about Dwarf Fortress is really inescapable. It's the visuals. I called the game the playable Steam version because the original Dwarf Fortress had a big issue. It was very inaccessible. My colony sim nerd friends and I tried it, and in the nicest way possible, it's from a different era. There is very little in the way of a tutorial, the visuals are symbols, and the UI is non-existent. This was a damn shame because it's probably one of the most advanced colony sims ever released. Luckily, now we have the Steam version, which greatly improves on all of these aspects. You have legible graphics, a basic tutorial, and a UI that is okay-ish. To modern standards, it might still seem a bit dated, but trust me, once we get into the insane entropic complexity of this game, you'll realize why it looks the way it does. The most important thing though is that the devs now have a framework from which to improve and work on the visuals. A jump from this to this is monumental, and more importantly, playable. So let's talk about the gameplay. Dwarf Fortress is a colony sim, but it really doesn't play like others in the genre. Your individual dwarves are so complex with a host of different traits and stats and a history, and they're dead. With the amount of procedurally generated depth to each character, you'd think you're meant to take care of your dwarves individually, like you would in Rumworld or Oxygen Not Included. But in Dwarf Fortress, your dwarves are very expendable. They come and go, and losing half of them can sometimes be part of a successful experience. You're looking out for the whole colony, and as long as a few dwarves survive, you haven't lost all your progress. This was a stepping stone that I had to get used to, because it's not the norm in these types of games. This, and the fact that it's a roguelike, means Dwarf Fortress can really throw you some chaotic challenges, and you can manage it, because you can always salvage or start over. The progression system in the game is really unlike anything I've ever seen. There's no tech tree or real objectives, so you only advance by making your fortress bigger and better. This usually involves digging deep into the earth. Another game might gauge your progress here by requiring better tools to dig through bedrock or something. But Dwarf Fortress says fuck it, if you want to start the game by digging to the center of the earth, go ahead. Your actions will have consequences. I love this because you can really set your own pace. The most advanced players can beeline for magma to get a magma forge going, while newer players can frolic in the woods for as long as they like. Dwarf Fortress is really unique in that it kind of throws you all the mechanics the game has to offer all at once. Right from the start of every playthrough, you can build every building and object in the game. There is no progress to unlock these, which really complements the roguelike nature of the game. Because of this, starting over doesn't feel like a loss, and trust me, you're going to be starting over a few times. Because you have most of the game's mechanics at your disposal right from the get-go, most of them aren't mandatory, and so you can get really far into the game without learning how really basic things work. The best example I can think of is the animal care system. The game teaches you at the start how to designate rooms, but it doesn't really tell you what rooms your colony is going to need. So after you make your first tavern, all your animals will gather there and starve to death. I played for hours before I realized all I had to do was make a pasture zone on the surface to stop this from happening. I just thought clearing out dead animals all the time was part of the experience. Every playthrough I had, I learned to handle another part of the game, but not knowing these things didn't really run any of my colonies into the ground. It's perhaps one of the most Sandbox games I've ever played. You can really dick around to your heart's content, without traditional barriers like food and resources being a constant challenge, as they would in other games. These things are so easy to manage that you can really just do whatever you want. And because there isn't really a defined path of progress and everything is randomly generated, your playthroughs are very unique and can take hilarious and fun turns. Because of this, Dwarf Fortress generates stories much better than other games do. It really is an entropy engine. In my first couple of playthroughs, I had so many funny random things happen. My one colony had a mad mayor with no legs that crawled around yelling at people until he picked a fight with a dog and lost. In another, I learnt the hard way that some rock types can be melted by magma, and flooded the entire mountainside of a volcano. Hell, I had a were-elk, as in a werewolf but an elk, infect half my fortress, which made every full moon a total bloodbath. I think experiences like this is what the creators of Dwarf Fortress really wanted. Not for players to reach some arbitrary end goal or min-max, but rather to have a unique, hilarious and fun experience. And then when their colony gets eaten by something with an illegible name, they start all over. Despite the game having now a modern Steam release, the biggest challenge for new players is still managing and understanding the UI of Dwarf Fortress. You can't have a big efficient colony without figuring out how to do things and how to do them quickly. Even the most basic things can be really complicated. Let me explain with an example. There are 3 different ways to build a chair. You could go to the workshop and ask for a chair, but if you need more chairs, you're going to have to keep putting in separate orders. You're going to need a lot of chairs, so this isn't ideal. So instead you could put in an order for this specific workshop to make X amount of chairs in the next tab. You can even set a nice condition. If chairs less than 1, make 1 chair. Great, now you have unlimited chairs. But this isn't really scalable because your other workshops won't be making chairs. So what you actually want to do is go to the manager window, set up a new order with the same instructions, but shared across all your workshops. Now you have a scalable chair industry that's managed in one place. It took me several playthroughs to just figure out this system, and there's a lot more than chairs that you have to worry about. Eventually you'll understand how all these UI mechanics work, but it takes a while. I have almost 100 hours as of writing this and I still don't understand all of them. But again, you can get pretty far into the game without knowing all of these. There was one menu that literally changed my entire Dwarf Fortress experience. It's this one that lets you assign areas to hotkeys so you can quickly go from place to place, without needing to scroll through hundreds of levels. It's essential when you start digging deep. That sort of brings me to another one of the inaccessible parts of the game. And even the Steam version suffers from this. The game plays on multiple Z levels, as in you can build really tall and mine really deep. And I'm not just talking about a few layers like a Sims house, I'm talking about hundreds of layers. This doesn't seem like much of a hassle because you can easily scroll between them, but you can only effectively see a few layers at once, and you can't see if there's anything above the layer that you're currently viewing, which makes it very frustrating to see what's happening when actors are moving quickly between Z levels, or when trying to understand a 3-dimensional space. For example, can you tell what this is? To the untrained eye, it doesn't look like much, but it's actually a complicated mineshaft with a series of ramps aligned for vertical travel, with a large central gap. See, it's just really hard to understand these spaces when you're seeing them only one layer at a time, but eventually your brain does start processing it a bit better. Visually though, it's not great, but it is limited by the engine and how you see the game from directly above. Another one of my gripes in Dwarf Fortress is the game speed. It took me quite a while to figure out that controlling it is part of the experience. It's not really built into the UI, but you can control it by changing the frame rate of the game. I don't think any other game has done this before. I know in-game engines are usually affected by the frame rate, but to make it part of the gameplay is something unique. The default speed is 100 FPS, and it's honestly quite breakneck, especially during combat. Things will fly across the screen and make several hundred actions in a matter of seconds. Sometimes when I get a combat notification and I jump to the scene without pausing, the fight is already done. In 2 seconds, my axe dwarf has ripped apart a goblin toe by toe, bruised and cut all his limbs, and then thrown him off a cliff. I'd highly recommend slowing the game down for combat. You can do this with Alt- and Alt+. This ties in with my last real gripe with the game, the notification system. You are bombarded with useless notifications which end up bearing important information. And many of them don't have sounds, so if you're not looking at the side of your screen, you'll miss them. Sometimes the only way you know a combat has started is because the in-game music changes. Often you'll lose a dwarf before you even know there's a fight going on. Also, the notifications don't do a good job of clearing themselves out. If you want to check the combat log, you're going to be inundated with all the combat events since the last time it was cleared out, effectively making it useless. Fortunately, this is probably pretty easy to fix, and I'm sure the devs will get to it. It's just funny seeing that a lot of the top mods for Dwarf Fortress are just UI and notification improvements. Because the game is such a sandbox, it's up to you to find fun in it. In this regard, it's kind of similar to Minecraft. You could have an uber productive base with everything square and efficient, but you'll find it's a lot more fun taking the time to build some really cool fortresses. And because of the simple graphics, you're forced to use your imagination to kind of figure out some of the spaces. Again, because the progression system is pretty light, you're free to build some really interesting and dynamic fortresses. And then when it gets overrun by necromancers, it feels exciting to start again and try another design out. Maybe this time you'd like to include an automatic defense system that drowns enemies that come into your base. You wouldn't think it, but there's a really advanced and complicated physics system in Dwarf Fortress. Liquids have volume and are affected by gravity realistically. Gravity also affects objects, and so pushing things off cliffs can cause real damage to something below. Dwarves can fall down staircases, and one of the more popular traps in the game involves using minecarts as shotguns. Because defense is such a big part of the game, it can be really fun to design complicated traps that completely obliterate anything trying to get in. Hell, you can even drop cages on intruders and then throw them into lava pits. Your imagination is really the limit here. For the last bit of the video, I'd just like to talk about the developers. They're called Bay 12 Games, but it's really just these two brothers. To call Dwarf Fortress their passion project is an understatement. They've been working on this game for decades and they are absolutely dedicated to it. Their level of commitment to this project is honestly unparalleled to any other game ever made. A lot of other gaming companies might have enormous budgets and great teams, but they'll never have something that these two have. And that's a true love for their game. They've literally dedicated their lives to it. So, my advice, give it a try if you like colony sims. It's really a one-of-a-kind experience. Thanks for watching.